Oh, hello there. I didn't see you. Hi, B. Dave Walters. I say words about things, and one of my very favorite things in the whole entire world is storytelling. I am a storytelling fiend. I've run vampire, werewolf, changeling, wraith, mage. I've done streams of all of these things. I've played all of these things. I have probably run more sessions of V5. I've almost certainly run more sessions of V5 than anyone else alive, and I'm probably in contention for running the most vampire period. I've run about 500, maybe 600 sessions of vampire V5 since it came out, because on my Patreon, we were doing about 30, 35 games a month for about 18 months. The only reason, but there's definitely been cats that have like been running weekly games since the 90s though. So there's some people, there's some old heads in there, but for V5 at least, I think I kind of had the market cornered. And the reason why I want to talk to you about this today is I think I have an unusual insight into what makes the world of darkness the world of darkness. But I also want to talk more generally about just effective storytelling, about effectively running a table, about how to even be a good player, because it is a collaborative art. And more than anything, I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. Also, shout out to some of my people here in chat. I see y'all from the Patreon. Um, and so the way I want to do it with the questions is you can ask me anything. You can ask anytime. Just if you type it in chat, write a capital question in front of it. I may see it right then and answer right then, but we have somebody that is like pulling them out and going to keep them to the side for me. So I will sprinkle in your questions during all of this. But really, I want this as much as possible to be as much about our conversation and interaction as much as me monologuing. Even though I think y'all know I will monologue nonstop for 90 minutes, that is not my goal. So if you have general questions about storytelling, if you even have specific things you've encountered at your table or issues that weren't quite sure how you could resolve, feel free to drop those on me and we will talk about it. Now, I had my music going in the background that I thought was very low, but it decided to be like deafeningly loud all of a sudden, probably because it's just me talking. It's all right. We might just have to go without. Yeah. Okay. All right. No, that's good. That's a good mellow music in the background. So, let me talk about this more generally to begin with here. I posted a thread I did some time ago about what makes a good DM. And for the most part, I still stand by everything I said here, but I want to dive into it a little more generally. And this applies to everything, not just the world of darkness. We will talk about the specific nuances of the world of darkness soon, but if you're not familiar with me and my work, it's like I exist equally in the Vampire World of Darkness community and also in Dungeons and Dragons, and have run a bunch of other games. So I'm kind of trying to set a conceptual framework first, that then we will drill down into the specifics of the World of Darkness. And then, time permitting, which it should, we can even drill down into some of the specifics of what makes vampire different than werewolf, different from changeling, different from wraith, different from mage. So, uh, the number one thing that I want you to take away from this more than anything is what a DM is a storyteller, ultimately. I have the unusual honor, quite frankly, of I play these games on stream. I run these games on stream, but I've also had television screenplays I've written, produced. I've had films I wrote, produced. I've had graphic novels I wrote, made. I've written novels, admittedly, self published those, but I still did it. And the reason why I can do this across different mediums and across different genres is because I understand storytelling structure. I would say more than anything, become a student of structure. And the way that I explain this to people is, right now there's 7.5 billion people on Earth, but we're all made from the same things, the same components: heart, blood, bones, muscle, sinew, lungs, obviously plus or minus some different parts of individual to individual, but by and large we're made all out of the same components that can still be arranged in near infinite variety. That's what structure is. A lot of times people think it's synonymous with being formulaic, but it isn't. If you understand the order in which you must string together events and the order in which things must transpire to arrive at a fulfilling emotional reaction from the audience, then you can do anything. And that is your number one job as a storyteller, is to elicit an emotional response. That is what you are there to do. It sounds dramatic when I say it, but I mean it. That storytelling, and I use this, I mean storytelling both as a blanket term and also specific to the world of darkness, but it's interchangeable with DMing, GMing, whatever. It is a sacred trust, especially in these games of the world of darkness, where the themes can get so much darker and some of the things you're exploring can become so much more personal. Um, but understand that people could be doing anything with their time. People have significant others, they have relationships, they have children, they have their own hobbies, their own goals, they have TV they could be watching, movies, they could be working out, they could be doing literally anything. And if they're choosing to take time out of their lives to spend with you must take that seriously. And as I said right now in chat, we do have some of the people from my Patreon community here. And one of the things that would always make me the happiest is when people wanted to play birthday games, when that was like on their day, what they wanted to do was spend time with me and the community that we built together. That was always very flattering and humbling to me. So never look at this as just a game. um do your best to make it a meaningful and fulfilling experience for everybody at the table every time they are at your table, and you will never want for players. Of course, as a storyteller, you're human. You're going to have days that hit better than others. Things you intend are going to hit sometimes better than others. That's fine. I'm talking about the way that you look at it and the intentionality that you bring to the table. So again, don't take that for granted at all. Remember also that the rules are there to facilitate the story, not the other way around. This is true in all games. The rules are really more like guidelines. You want to referee without punishing. As Jason Carl is fond of saying, and I agree with, he always says, "My job is to represent the world of darkness and what it demands." So you are there to be an arbiter of fate, not necessarily an impartial arbiter of fate, because you are trying to tell a story and weave a narrative, but your goal is to never make the people feel like you're railroading them. Because the reason why people play these games is a statement I've made many times and is a hill I will very much die on, is to have a chance to feel powerful, to feel like they're at cause in the narrative, to feel like their actions or inactions matter, which again is why video games will never completely replace TTRPGs ever. Because no matter how sophisticated a game is, no matter how sophisticated its AI is, if I'm playing Elder Scrolls and I roll into town and there's the shopkeep, and I'm like, I want to rip this wagon wheel off of this cart right here and beat the shopkeeper to death, I can't do that. I mean, maybe I can attack the shopkeeper, but you know what I mean. If I'm like, you know what, I'm burning this town to the ground, you can't do that. Um, some things have to be fixed by the nature of the medium in which the story is being told. That is not true in TTRPGs. They are truly unlimited as a sandbox, which is something that is an asset, not a hindrance. So always try to be yes anding your players to the best of your ability, or at least if you have to say no, be like no, but, because you don't want to rob them of that sense of having an impact, of having, I apologize, my nose is very itchy for some reason. It was very windy and I think I like pollen's bugging me. I apologize. You don't want to rob them of that sense of impact and contribution, right? Now, this will vary somewhat by the kind of story you're telling. I realize we're here talking about the world of darkness, but all things being equal, in a game like D&D that is high heroism, doing things and defeating the monster and saving the day is a big part of those games, in a way that it is not a big part of the world of darkness. Of course, there's Ravenloft, and different tables and different sessions may vary even in D&D, but all things being equal, there's a monster. We're going to go defeat the monster and win the day is very much what those games are about. In the way that that is not what the World of Darkness is about, because more often than not, the monster is you. So, but by the same token, even though I'm saying you're yes anding and no butting them, you still have to be an arbiter of the game. You know, there you still have to be at least a semi impartial judge. I know I just said you're not completely impartial because you got a way that you're trying to go, but you know, the rules, even though they are there to facilitate the narrative and the rule of cool makes sense, they're also there for a reason. Most of the time the game is arranged the way it is for a reason, and that is to maximize the enjoyment of everyone at the table. On occasion, you can rule a cool things just to give a player a great moment. I try to never just be like, no, you can't do that. Um, that is why I always play with the house rule in D&D that, you know, a 1 always fails and a 20 always succeeds. Like, no matter how good you are at something, there's always a chance. There's always a chance that you will hit a hole in one. There's always a chance that you will fumble and break your club. In Vampire, my players know I would let them roll for almost anything. Like, I mean, you can give it a shot. Let's see how many successes are you going to get. I don't know. Let's let fate decide. Um, but by the same token, be familiar enough with the rules to know when you can bend them and when you can break them and when you really need to leave them in place. Because contrary to what you might think, walking around on God mode is actually fairly unfulfilling. Walking around being unbeatable and unkillable is not necessarily something that you're going to want past, you know, a few minutes, because it's kind of unfulfilling in the grand scheme of things. I remember I had a character again in D&D that if you played 3.5 was a druid planar shepherd with the saint template, vow peace, vow poverty, vow of nonviolence. And I don't need to get into the minutia of that, but that character is basically unkillable. So I won D&D. Like, I did it, you know, like I'm like, okay, I have essentially made a god. I basically made pun if you go far enough back that you know what that is. And it was fun for like 2 or 3 sessions until it wasn't. It was like, I'm never at any risk. I never have anything that can happen to me. I don't have anything that can hurt me. Then it's kind of like, well, what's the point? You know, nobody's actually interested in playing a Mary Sue. They think they are. They're not, though. And if you're constantly like, yes, you can have that. Yes, you can have that. Yes, you can have that. They will be happy in the short term, but they will tune out and lose interest in the long term because there's no stakes. That's one of the things you have to always make sure that your narrative has is stakes. Like, what's at risk here? What's going to happen if we succeed? What's going to happen if we don't succeed? What is this going to cost? And when you talk about storytelling in the world of darkness, cost has always got to be at the top of the list. It is a storytelling game of personal horror. Vampire is a storytelling game of personal horror. The others are not so much that, but they are all still take place in the world of darkness that is a fairly grim and oppressive environment, somewhat. Again, we'll talk about this more going forward. But oh, yes. Oh, she actually can't give me the questions. Okay, hold on a second, y'all. Let me see here. All right, talk amongst yourselves while I unlock this thing. I thought I gave permission for anyone that had the link to edit. I apologize. There we go. Boom, boom. That's weird. This is my hold music, my legally distinct hold music. There we go. You should be all good. Survey says you know what's funny? This works really well with the music that I have playing in the background. All right. Hey. Okay. All right. So I'm like, car, rant on. Okay, perfect. Keep that cost at the forefront of your mind. If they do this or don't do this, what is it going to cost them? It is a good note to hit in all methods of storytelling, really, as a way to continuing to ratchet up the tension and continuing to increase the pressure on the characters, especially as they become more and more powerful, making the story less about what can they do and more about what should they do. But in the world of darkness in particular, you want to make sure that you're always going out of your way to make things as bad as possible, essentially, and have like the worst possible repercussions from actions and inactions that you can all the time. Um, but it's, let me just say this as a side. When you're on the other side of the table and you are the storyteller, again, you have to be mindful of the power you wield. I think you will find oftentimes a lot of the biggest jerks you will ever encounter and narcissists and power trippers you will ever encounter oftentimes are DMs. Like for me, my flag is when someone's like, I'm a consequences DM. Like, mm, mm. I don't think I've met anyone yet that said something like that that wasn't a jerk. You're not there to punish or hinder your players. You're there to challenge your players. And those are two very different things. So keep that at the forefront of your mind. Now, like I said, doesn't mean they get to do everything because, again, failure has to be possible. Otherwise, no risk, no reward. If victory is a foregone conclusion, nobody wants to play the game. That is why in when you play sports, that's why you keep score. Like if the NFL, if the Super Bowl this past week just had been like, oh, Tampa Bay and Kansas City are just going to come out and scrimmage for 4 quarters. We'll have a sporting game. We don't even need to keep score. We'll just throw some touchdowns, kick some field goals. Everybody have a good time. No one would tune in and watch. No one would care. There's got to be stakes. It's got to cost something. There's got to be an opportunity for soaring victory and crushing defeat. And especially in the world of darkness, those two states can become very much interwoven. Now, the other major thing that I would really want you to take from this, besides your job as storytellers to elicit an emotional reaction, is the fact that this is a collaborative art. This is a story that you are telling together, that you are weaving together. You, as storyteller, and all the players, and the dice, because the dice are the fourth, fifth, or sixth person sitting at the table, because they will amaze and astound and betray you. You all work together to make that a thing. If you're not really sure how to go about adding that layer of collaboration, a lot of times the simple trick is just to say to the one of your players when they do something, you tell me what that looks like. You tell me. We walk into a room. You tell me what's it like in here? How's it feel? Let them describe things. Let them take the narrative reins on occasion and be able to add things that you can then yes and to. And also for you, I'm going to talk in a minute about what makes a good player because it is still relevant to this collaborative art element of it. But I will tell you right now, always look for an opportunity to make someone else look cool. Always pass the ball as often as you can to someone else to have a moment, because that is when everybody is having their most enjoyable occasion, is when every single person is getting a chance to shine. And not everybody are these type A extroverts that will jump out and just grab the spotlight. So on occasion, especially if you know somebody is introverted or more quiet or more hesitant or new to this, you have to set them up with opportunities to be dope. If you watch me in almost every stream that I'm on, I'm always trying to do this. If I say or do something, I either try and set someone up for somebody else to knock it over, or I will say a thing and then I'm like, what do you think? Like I never just leave it just sort of dangling. I try to be like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Bang, what are you doing? Or just something like that to keep that moving around, to make sure everybody gets a chance to do something, especially if I notice the person at the table hasn't done anything in a while. When I'm storytelling, I do the exact same thing where it's, if somebody hasn't spoken up for a few minutes, I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Now, I will tell you this. Sometimes you might have people that get nervous, and I've had players that, get very anxious if they get suddenly ambushed with things. And one of the joys of the digital age is I'll be having whole conversations behind the scenes where I'm messaging people like, "Hey, you good? I'm about to kick it to you to do that. Are you okay? You good? Like you've been quiet." Sometimes I had people that were like, "Yeah, I think today I just need to listen. It was a long day." And then other times they're like, "Yeah, I'm ready. I just didn't know when to jump in." So check in with your players. If you can, do it digitally and privately. If not, even if you're at the table, just be like, "Okay, we're about to come to you. Are you ready?" And give them a little bit of warning. um uh Remember, I know I just said it's not just a game, but it is a game. And what I mean by that is you're there to have fun. uh as long as everybody is having a good time, you're doing it right. As long as everybody is sort of nodding along with you, or smiling and laughing with you, or crying with you, or terrified or rage filled and pissed off at you, that's what you want. Your only enemy is meh. Your only enemy is indifference, or if people start zoning out. And when we return to the time that we can all get together again, you're within your rights to ban phones at the table. You could do that. But the easiest way to keep people engaged, if you think they're zoning out during the game, is again out of nowhere. What are you doing? Enough times that you just like point them out when they see their screensaver come up and they have to like re-engage, that people will form the habit of paying attention. I realize sometimes you might think, well, hey, it's okay for me to check my Twitter because it's not my turn. But that's a jerk thing to do, because remember, I said it's a collaborative art. If you zone out when it's not your turn, then you're not really playing the game. You're just rolling dice when somebody asks you to roll dice. You still have to be aware of the overall flow of the entire narrative and the overall flow of what's happening. And ideally, thinking in advance of what you're going to do so that when the storyteller gets to you, you're already ready with, "This is what I do." Ideally, you're already ready with, "This is what I do. I've already rolled the dice. Here are the successes I got," which you will see when you watch me on streams. I do this most of the time, where I'm like, yeah, it's my turn. I'm going to use mesmerism. I got 7 successes. And then the storyteller can move things along faster, because you don't want to bog things down by like staring at your sheet trying to figure out your move when everybody's waiting for you. If you stay engaged the entire time, when it gets to you, you can move things along a lot faster, right? And when you're aware of what everybody's doing too, that will help you form ideas that might be that wouldn't have come to you otherwise had you not had that bit of inspiration from other people. Now, complete a separate thing here that bears stating is, a lot of stuff has been said about the Matt Mercer effect, that like you see people doing this at a professional level and a high level, and you think, well, that means I can't do it. And I know for a fact Mercer himself hates it. We've talked about it. But I got good news and I got bad news for you. The bad news is, no, you cannot do what Matt Mercer does. You cannot do what I do. You cannot do what Jason Carl does. You cannot do what Brennan Lee Mulligan does. You cannot do what Jasmine Boulard does. Like, you really can't. And if you're comparing yourself against that, that's the wrong set of criteria. Because the good news is, we cannot do what you do. We cannot tell your stories. We cannot weave the narrative that is in your mind and your heart to lay out for people. We cannot sing your song. And your song is innately valid. The story that you have to tell is innately valid. So get your friends together and make some magic with each other and keep plugging away at it. And when you start at the beginning, you might not be very good at it. Actually, I kind of can guarantee you won't be very good at it, because nobody's good at anything when they first start. But hopefully, over time, as you're becoming a student of the craft and your skill improves and your players' skill improves as players, because it is a skill that you must hone, then you guys will see overall the experiences that you all start to have are richer and richer and more in depth. Because, it's as a quirk of psychology, our minds, our human minds, don't know the difference between something that is real and something that is very vividly imagined. I'm keeping this a very PG thing, but I can prove it. If you, anytime you allow yourself to fantasize about an encounter you've had or wish to have, you get physical reactions in your body from something that is purely imagined, maybe in a room while you're by yourself. That is how our minds work. The dark side of this, by the way, is why worrying and playing painful memories or getting into a very anxious state where you're imagining terrors is so detrimental, because to your body, that is really happening to you. So try to break that habit to the best of your ability, and get used to breaking that pattern and disrupting those thoughts and moving yourself back towards positive or at least neutral thoughts as quickly and as often as you can, because your mind really doesn't know the difference. That being said, when you're playing these games and you're going in and you're having these encounters with your friends, the serotonin and oxytocin and adrenaline and every other chemical that is being released in your mind is real. So to you, you've taken those trips with those people, you've had those battles with those people. I've got friends that will be friends for the rest of my life because of games we played together. I got friends that, we've done raids and MMOs that we've never been in the same room. My 99% of my Patreon community I've never been in the same room with, but we've got bonds now because of the experiences that we had that will last forever. And that is something that I wish for literally everyone to be able to experience. So if you're thinking about doing this, absolutely do this. Now, let me check in real quick and see what's happening on my questions here. All right. And also, this gives me an excuse to like sip a drink. Okay, question. With the World of Darkness covering darker subject matter, how do you handle a session zero in Lines and Veils? This was a new concept in the last 1 to 2 years. You know what? Let's get down in it then. Um, Actually, believe it or not, let's not get down in on this yet, because this. Well, no. Now I said we get down in it. Let's get down in it. Understanding, um, the World of Darkness is this world. It is the world that we exist in right now. That pizza shop on the corner is really there. Your neighbor's house is really there. And corrupt politicians, lazy billionaires, all of those things, 100% true. Like corruption, pollution, global warming, civil unrest, hopelessness, all exists. Except underneath that veneer of civility, there is a whole other world that you're unaware of, where vampires and werewolves and everything else that you've ever thought about or ever can imagine are absolutely real and exist. And there are multiple systems, both magical and mundane, that has been keeping that awareness away from you and everyone else for centuries. I think because of that, the World of Darkness in many ways is actually one of the easiest game systems to get into, because you don't need to understand a lot of luminous lore in order for it to make sense. People comprehend it's like, well, you're in New York, or you're here in this town. You're here. Like in my stories, when I'm describing locations in LA, those all exist. So I'm thinking about in my mind what these places look like as I'm saying it out loud. And oftentimes when I go driving around now, still, I'm like, oh, that's where they fought the sheriff right there. That's the 7-Eleven that the Silent Striders own. It's right there. Um, so, starting very, very closely to the mundane in the real world is a good thing. I will tell you, I personally play with the house rule that the COVID pandemic is not a thing. And I also play with the house rule that a lot of the real world political issues that we encounter are not a thing, simply because that is a choice I make, in that these games are an escape. And part of the difficulty of the pandemic is it is a foe we cannot see and a foe that we cannot fight back against, which is contrary to that what I was saying earlier about having your action or inaction be able to make a difference. Your mileage may vary. Different people want different things. I mean, I've heard things like Pandemic and a lot of those games are actually like selling better than ever now because that is the way some people cope. That is not the way that I've chosen to cope. And for the most part, I've gotten very positive feedback from my players about that. So in a session zero and talking about lines and veils, and by the way, for those of you not familiar with the concept, lines and veils are basically things that you kind of have tiers of, like, some things I'd rather we not deal with this, but I can. I'm kind of getting uncomfortable. Could we change the subject? Or hard stops, like, I cannot deal with this. This is something that I cannot be a party to a story that has this in any capacity. For the most part, I think for a sane and decent person, most veils are fairly easily identified. Like rape tends to be a no-go, pedophilia, necrophilia, things like that. But I hear stories, y'all, where not everybody feels the same way. So sometimes these things have to be stated outright, especially with Vampire being a horror game, being where sensuality figures into it, where sexuality figures into it, where there is an entire predatory feeding style that is based upon sex, where there is another feeding style that is based expressly on violence and force. Um, there's whole powers of mind control where mortals are defenseless and you can make them do things. If you're not careful, you can very easily move into some gross places. Now, that being said, there are also times narratively um, that I do feel like you kind of have to push the envelope, to which I would say, like, you take something like the movie The Road with Viggo Mortensen, which you haven't seen, you should see exactly once. And I do mean exactly once, where it is about it's the end of the world. It's 12 years after the collapse of civilization. And I think it is probably the clearest portrayal of what the actual collapse of civilization will be like. Like, it's not going to be some Book of Eli Old West nonsense. It'll be like The Road. But there's a scene in The Road where, and this isn't a spoiler, they find like a bomb shelter, an underground bomb shelter where human beings are being kept and cannibals are feeding off of them, but they're feeding off of them incrementally. So you find people that are like missing a foot, missing a leg, missing an arm, because they're basically like a meat supply for cannibals. Um, that's bleak. That is dark, but that's the world of darkness. That is appropriate to the world of darkness, quite frankly. Now, you also will run into some things where people don't necessarily know something is going to be a thing until it's a thing. We ran into this on Beyond Heroes, where one of our players, turns out they had a thing with teeth. They didn't know they had a thing with teeth until it came up. Turns out they had a thing with body horror, getting physically damaged, and like vivid descriptions of injuries. Apparently that was a thing that even they didn't know they had. So what I suggest is, during your session zero, you explain to everyone that this is a storytelling game of personal horror. It has a different tone than D&D has got and that other games have got. Even like Ravenloft, which is dark D&D, it's still different. Um, Vampire, all things being equal, is not about heroism, even though there definitely can be a heroic component to it. What Vampire is about is, you are a monster and you don't want to be. You are sliding down a scale of inevitability in which you will be lost. And what most people don't realize about Vampire, because it is very subtly stated, in fact, I don't know that anywhere is it stated outright, is there is a benchmark of humanity from 1 to 10. Most characters start at 7 or 8. It's very difficult to have a humanity of 10. It's very difficult to have a humanity of 10 when you're still just a human. I apologize, I have a yawn coming on. Got to oxygenate that blood. So over time, no matter what you do, as you live a certain amount of time, you start to drop in humanity over having lived so long. And when you drop to humanity zero, you are something called a wight. You are just a mindless monster where whatever glimpse of what you once were is gone and you're nothing but a killing machine. What most people don't realize is 100% of vampires end up there. If you don't die, if you live long enough without meeting the final death, you will become a wight. Your humanity will erode over time no matter what you do until that is all that is left of you. And if you want a terrifying thought, have a third or fourth generation wight loose in your city. Probably a bad idea because it will kill anyone and everything indiscriminately and not care. But theoretically, that is where the game ends. So understanding in advance that you've got this sliding scale of downward inevitability towards doom is very much the backdrop of this story, where on the one hand, you have eternity to scheme and build power and become anything you would want. Eternity is your enemy because you know where it ends. Werewolf, and when I talk about what stories are about, by the way, this is a thing that applies not just to the world of darkness, but storytelling in any context whatsoever, which is a question you always have to ask yourself: is what's the story about? This is called the theme, by the way. When you hear people talk about theme, what's the story about? Because if you say to me, "I'm writing a movie about a bank robbery," it's like, no, you're not. That the bank robbery is what happens. That's not what the movie's about. You know, what's the statement that you're making when you get up from the table at the end of the session? What do you want people to take away with them from that? Right? um and Werewolf is about, um quite frankly, impotent rage, that they are furious at the death of Gaia and that the planet is dying, but they can't stop it. Arguably, they've already lost. This is a very much kind of a backdrop concept in so many of the World of Darkness games, especially as I've been running so many of them on Q Times. By the way, you can check that out. We did Anarchs in New York, Rage Across New York, Echoes of Oblivion, which was Wraith. Oh, Dreaming Across New York, and the next one we're doing is Mage, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do a World of Darkness crossover. They're all up on the Q Times YouTube. So these things I'm explaining to you, if you want to see them applied, you should watch it, especially Wraith. My God, they outdid themselves in Wraith. They are awful to each other in Wraith for reasons I will tell you about here in a second when we get to that game. Because I think it was the one the least number of people have played back in the day, but it's probably having the biggest renaissance with some things that are happening and going to be happening. And I don't want to get, shot with NDA bullets. But Werewolf, again, the point I was making there is this idea of an impending inevitable doom is very much the backdrop of most of the World of Darkness games. Honestly, I think they're all of the World of Darkness games. It was Gehenna, the elders rising and killing all the baby vampires and vampires, the apocalypse in Werewolf where it's just too late. It's the long winter in Changeling. It's the consensus reality kicking in completely in Mage and losing everything, because, and quite frankly, a lot of those stories were written by the same group of people in roughly the same amount of time, and so it's easy to kind of pick up the other games because the mechanics are very similar, and then a lot of the themes of here's the types, here are the factions, here's the terrible inevitable doom that is barreling down on all of us. And even when the games were out in the first place, when White Wolf was going away the first time, they wrote endings to all the games, so they all have a finite conclusion. And the funny thing is, like, now is they're starting to see their resurgence. It's all like, oh no, Doom, it's too late, and you're like, oh, we lived. Oh, okay, dope. Well, now what? Um, but the hopeless, almost feudal nature of what the werewolves are facing, that they still must fight back against because they cannot give up. While there's life, there's hope, is what Werewolf's about. Wraith is the same thing. Wraith is about the descent into becoming a specter. Wraith is unique in the sense that in that game, you are in Vampire, you have a beast, and the beast tempts you, and the beast wants what it wants, but the beast is a passenger. The beast is something that has been added to you. um in werewolf, you are that. Like, you're born a werewolf. You're as much that as you are a person. Pending how you were born, you're more that than you are a person. In wraith, you have something that's called a shadow, and your shadow is everything that you are. It is every mistake you've ever made. It is everything that you are ashamed of. It is not your evil twin. Your shadow is you, and it hates you, and it wants nothing but to drag you down to destruction and eradicate everything that was good about you. So basically, nothing but the shadow will be left, and you'll become a specter. In Wraith, in particular, there's a unique mechanic where your shadow is played by another player at the table. So that is why I said during that stream, when they were playing each other's shadows, the things they were saying to each other, like, I never would have even thought of, much less said out loud. Like, there were so many times that I thought I was going to ruin a take because they'd say something, and I was just like, yo, that was so brutal. But that's that game. But in a strange way, it was cathartic. Like, we'd get to the end of those wraith sessions, and it'd be like a bomb had gone off. Like, afterwards, like, nobody had anything left to say, but in a strange way, you almost felt lighter for it. It's very odd. And just for the record, for those of you that have joined in, you can ask me questions. You can ask anything you want. Just put a capital question in front of it, please. If you don't put question in front of it, we won't see it, won't be able to pull it out for me to be able to talk about it here. But mage is, well, changeling is, they're these mystical fey creatures that come from this magical world, essentially, or are beings of the magical world. Some of them physically left and went into the spirit world for a while and are back now, but others stayed the entire time. And the magic is going out of the world and being replaced by this long winter. Same thing. It's, they can't stop it. You know, they're trying, but the slow forward grind of progress is going to kill them all. Mage, it is the consensus reality will kick in, where it's the same thing. It's just as people's beliefs in assumptions about reality become harder and harder, it becomes more and more difficult to manipulate reality. You know, and then they can't do anything else, and they will be locked into the same endless hamster wheel that all the rest of humanity is locked into. I think that one of the balances to try and strike, actually, well, yeah, let me finish this thought. The balances to try and strike is through that large scale oppressive hopelessness, while still finding your moments to still go on night after night and still have your own victories or your own crushing defeats, because it is not torture porn. It is never supposed to be torture porn. It is, you lead a costly existence. In almost all of these games, you are a monster of a sort. You are happier, or you're more or less at peace with it. But this monster may be something that was done to you. It may be what you are, but it is going to cost you and is going to keep costing you, which is the thing you have to put kind of at the forefront. Now, how heroism manifests in the world of darkness is, the essence of heroism is sacrifice. This is true at all times, by the way. If you ever wonder what makes a hero, sacrifice. Which is why I've made the argument so many times that Batman is the most compelling superhero. Because of all of them, he is the only one. It's not his fault his parents got killed, like Spider-Man. He doesn't have superpowers that he is obligated to use to help the world, like Superman. He could just stay home and fund his own personal police force and go on with his life. Yet he goes out every night and puts his own mind and body and spirit on the line to help his fellow human beings, night after night after night, when he doesn't have to. And that is why Batman, he sacrifices the most. He gives up the most. And that is why Batman is the most compelling superhero. At least by those parameters. But I said what I said, and I stand by it. You look at a character like something like an Anakin Skywalker or an Arthas Menethil, which are characters that are archetypes that I love, that are the well-meaning character that is swept away into darkness. because he is acting from a place of selfishness disguised as altruism. Those are all very much World of Darkness stories, because pretty much the whole time Arthas is trying to save his people. I mean, at least he believes he is until he isn't, you know. He was definitely susceptible to the call of the power of the Lich King. You know, Darth Vader thought he was giving into the dark side to try and save Padme because he hadn't saved his mother. But at any time, Anakin could have chosen the Jedi path of non-attachment and understood the fact that, you know, his mother died, but she was going to die at some point anyways. He was going to die at some point anyway, the Jedi way, which is why the character of Ahsoka Tano is so compelling, because she is faced with every single challenge that Anakin is faced with, but Ahsoka chooses correctly. Their journeys are parallel. They're inverse. It is not Anakin and Obi-Wan that is the same. It is Anakin and Ahsoka that are the same. That's why that character works. Um, so, and I think that's in many ways, even though all of these are both Star Wars canon for this sake, Darth Vader's story is far more of a World of Darkness story than Ahsoka Tano's is. Although you could even make an Ahsoka Tano style narrative and Obi-Wan style narrative in the World of Darkness, in the sense that Ahsoka lost everything. She lost the order. She lost her master. She's been through a meat grinder and she's alone. Obi-Wan, same thing. Duchess Satine, who he loved, but he stuck to his Jedi vows and was not with her, and then had to watch her die and couldn't even seek revenge because that's not the Jedi way. Although, in a manner of speaking, he got revenge eventually. But it is the emotional cost of this and how that twisted in each one of them, and they had to deal with it in their own way and keep moving forward. You follow me? Um, when in doubt, if you're not sure, it always comes back to sacrifice, which is heroic as it is going to get or not get. That might manifest in a game of Vampire as your willingness to stay away from your touchstones. Maybe you have to even let one of your touchstones be sacrificed for the greater good. You know, it always comes back to cost. That's the kind of heroism you will see in the World of Darkness. This doesn't mean that you can't have stories where maybe they do something very overt to help someone else, to help mortals, to run a sacrifice play, to give up their own lives for the sake of their coterie or pack or motley or whoever, circle or whoever. But it is not really, I'm here to do the right thing because it's the right thing, if that makes sense. And if you have a character that is where they're coming from in that place, then it is your job as a storyteller to twist that knife as much as possible. Like, one of my favorite quotes was from Stephen Moffat when he was talking about what happened to Donna on Doctor Who, which she left, which I won't spoil if you're not familiar with. But he just, when he talked about Donna's fate, he said, it was the most terrible thing I could think of to do to her, and therefore I had to do it. Y'all know me. That's how I operate. I'm like, what's the worst thing I can do? I must do it, right? Because that's what makes the game interesting and fulfilling. That's what gives you those cathartic moments of cost, you know, cost being overcome or cost not being overcome. Now, before I go too far, because y'all know how I like to ramble, but I like to think it's a topical ramble. I will just say, with the lines and veils, the good thing is to have a system of yellow X's and red X's. If you're playing digitally, like most of us are right now, just let somebody message you privately. If you are, you know, if you're back in person, maybe you have some signal up to and including a real yellow X or a real red X. A yellow X just means, hey, be careful. You know, we're heading towards something I don't like here. Me, I don't like imperiling children. I don't like imperiling animals. Those are things I don't enjoy, you know? Um, those are stories I'm not interested in watching, and stories I'm not interested in telling. They're not necessarily hard blockers for me, but if that, you know, if a baby is dangling off of a rail somewhere, that's gonna be like, you know, like if the German Shepherd charges the werewolf, I'm like, you know. I don't think I have any red X's beyond the red X's everyone should have, of course, but A red X is I need you to stop right now. I need this has to stop right now. The scene has to change right now. The system that we have is my people, especially when we're doing these games digitally, you know, if they message me red X, the scene stops literally mid sentence, no explanation. You could be in the middle of the Elysium, somebody is pulling out the knife, and I'm describing how it slides slowly into their flesh between their third and fourth rib, and then you guys are outside and you hear the police sirens in the distance. What would you all like to do next? You know, no ifs, ands, or buts. You don't have to discuss it. You don't have to make the person feel weird about it. A red X is a red X. Um, I will say there may be times, unfortunately, that is going to give some of the people at the table a sense of narrative blue balls when there's no payoff, especially if they feel like the other person is overreacting. But at the end of the day, you don't know what someone else's triggers are. You don't know what their traumas are. You don't know why that thing is a deal breaker. And quite frankly, it's none of our business. It's supposed to be fun. And if something is being traumatic, it is not being fun. And that is why you have to switch right then and have to not make the person feel weird about it. Maybe when the session is over, you can say, hey, if you're comfortable in talking about it, I would like to know what was the problem there, because you can go differently. Like in that scenario of watching somebody get stabbed, was the issue the knife? Was the issue of the description of violence? Was the issue, the type of person that died, the manner? But also understand that person may not be in a place where they can even talk about it, much less want to talk about it. And if that's the case, you just kind of got to accept that and keep rolling. It's the nature of the beast, especially when you get down into these things. I will also say, though, because of the World of Darkness being so intimate and in being storytelling games of personal horror, is it allows people to work through things and work through traumas in a way that I have found no other medium can. I can't tell you, and quite frankly, it's not my place to tell all of these stories that I've been told from some of the people that have participated in these games with me. But I will tell you, just in general, one of the things I always did is, unless somebody overtly told me in their backstory that their parents were terrible, their parents are always good, or at least trying. I never have abusive parents unless they tell me. That's my backstory. Um, because one of the first stream I was ever on, I was playing with someone who, again, I don't need to tell you who they are. We were talking about who their parents were going to be in their backstory, and they said, my real dad is horrible. I need my fictitious dad not to be. And that always stuck with me. And I realized so many of us weren't necessarily blessed with loving present parents. And so in my fictitious way, they all are in their own way. And I remember a scene that we had that involved some time jumping shenanigans, where one player got to see their father, who'd been dead for years. And as they were leaving, the father just said, I'm proud of you, and hugged them before they left. And this person messaged me afterwards, and they were like, I got so emotional and ended up crying after that because my real dad has never told me he's proud of me. And I was just like, yo, you know? But I've seen people that were shy become very overt and outspoken. I've seen people that were dealing with a background in abuse be able to confront their abusers, even fictitiously, and in that give them a sense of real world fulfillment and having been freed from these things. But that's only possible when you create an environment of safety where people feel like they can start to explore these things and open themselves enough that they can feel some of these things and understand if it becomes too much at any time, they can back away from that and it is going to be okay. And they will be loved and supported and not made to feel weird or not made to feel wrong. Next question. Again, type in chat, capital question, all caps. Do you prefer to create your own world or run a game in a more established or existing setting? I've done both. Um, all things being equal, I think I prefer an existing setting just because you've already got a common vocabulary for everything, you know? Um, Everyone knows LA, everyone knows New York, everyone knows Neverwinter or Waterdeep. you know. But I definitely like to make my own mark on the place. Um, like for instance, big chunks of my chronicle happen in San Diego because I defined a Camarilla court for San Diego because I wanted a place where people that chose to be Camarilla could play and not feel like jerks because like the Camarilla are all clearly not nice in LA. So I wanted like a place where Camarilla kindred could still go and feel like they can play the game and not feel like they're elitists. I also made the anarchs down there. They're the jerks. So if you want to go to a place where you can be like, oh, these unruly anarchs don't know their place, there you go. That's San Diego. Because that was an important thing. Hang on, I gotta open my door. Hold on. It's the joys of that. I'm dying. Joys of that Southern California living. I can still have my indoor outdoor airflow going here. Yeah, but I mean that's just my thing. I've definitely created homebrew worlds. I mean, I'm lead developer of Into the Motherlands. We're creating like homebrew worlds, plural. And if you saw the things I did for World Builders, that was in my own homebrew D&D setting. Theogony and Kairos, the first story that I ever did on stream was a homebrew setting. So next question. What lessons about telling stories did you learn from running so many games in just over a year? I mean, I'm laying all of them on you. That's what we're here to talk about is the lessons I've learned. Um, and for all of the mention, the world of darkness being about darkness and monsters, I feel like it is actually very Manichaean. Two of the three primary settings, Mage and Werewolf, are about characters fighting oppressive evil forces like the technocracy of the Worm. How do you inject darkness into the other world of darkness games with ostensibly clearer senses of goodies, and baddies? That's great. Way to drop Manichaeism in there. I'm going to push back on that in the sense that the technocracy and the worm aren't evil. They never were. In the way these stories were portrayed in the 90s, even though they were supposed to be dark and moody then, there still was a certain binary nature of the morality that you're not wrong about. In Vampire, the Camarilla was how you did it. They were the good guys. The Anarchs were just these unruly children that just didn't know their place. They were just a hindrance and a headache. And of course, the Sabbat were your enemies. And that's just how it was. Now in V5, the pendulum is kind of swung there where the Anarchs are the good guys and the Camarilla are the out of touch jerks. And the the Sabbat are your enemies. Some things never change. Also, I said what I said. I see some of y'all in chat. I said what I said. The worm in Werewolf, which for those of you that aren't familiar with Werewolf, is there is sort of a three a tripart divinity. There's Gaia, that is kind of the spirit of the earth and the mother of the werewolves, metaphorically. In the werewolves are Gaia's immune system, but you have these three forces of the worm, the weaver, and the wild. The wild is unchecked growth. The wild is nature. It just expansion is the wild. The weaver is structure, organization, all of civilization, buildings, cities, technology. That's all the work of the weaver. And the worm is decay. The worm is corruption. The worm is death. But you need that. The worm is vital. It always was. Unchecked, untapped growth from the wild would not be good. Everything would just be drowned in a sea of plenty that would actually be terrible. The weaver, even though you have this organizational principle, you cannot build infinitely. Some like things must fall apart at some point, if only to give way for new and better things. It's just as easy to think of the worm as a forest fire. An unchecked forest fire is devastating, catastrophic, can destroy homes, can destroy lives. And yet forest fires are still absolutely vital to forest health. There's some plants that their seeds won't bloom unless they're exposed to high temperatures. It comes through and it clears all the detritus and all the trash and the garbage, and it gives new things an opportunity to grow. That's what the worm is. The problem is the worm is unchecked. The worm is disproportionate. The worm, because of companies like Pentex and some other things, corruption and decay is progressing unchecked and is starting to kill everything. That's the problem with the worm. Same with the technocracy. The technocracy from Mage, and if you're not familiar with Mage, a Mage is the Matrix, straight up. So much so, the Wachowskis cannot convince me they didn't play a ton of Mage in the 90s before they made The Matrix. Like, there's literally nothing they could say to me that would ever convince me of this. Pretty much everything you know about The Matrix is true about Mage, more or less. In the sense, some rules can be bent, some rules can be broken. There's these non-specific governmental-esque powers in place that if you go too far will show up and murder your face. That's the technocracy. Now, the technocracy was born out of the order of reason, and the thing that they realized, in many ways, the technocracy were some of the first hunters. They realized supernatural entities are a threat to humanity. They're not just a threat to humanity, they're a threat to all of reality. And some of us must fight back against them to protect the human race. That's what the order of reason was for. That's what the technocratic union is. Whoa. I know, I said it too many times. I summoned them. It's like Candyman. Hang on. I appreciate the fact that when I start talking about the necessity of the technocracy is when it gets windy and the door swings open. That only would have been better if I was talking about Wraith. The technocracy's goal was to protect the consensus reality, right? To everything Agent Smith said in The Matrix is how they feel, honestly. They aren't like turning people into batteries or whatever. That's a conceit of The Matrix, but that is their stated objective. And the funny thing is the tone in some of the new technocracy material, which I was lucky enough to be able to contribute to, that Onyx Path is coming out with, was the tone of the book is very much like, hey, so we won. Everything we wanted to do, we did. Everybody's got cell phones. They're all plugged in. Why is everything still terrible? And even the technocracy's not sure. But the same thing, they're not evil. They were the adversaries in your stories, but they weren't ever an evil force. And arguably, they're not completely wrong. The mages do go around throwing around paradox. They do go around causing ruptures in reality that hurts regular people. That's the haze of the morality of the world of darkness. It was easy to be like, no, they're bad. They're just Terminators. And don't get me wrong, some of them are Terminators. The question is, are you so sure you don't deserve termination? And that is the line that you as storyteller have to walk to keep shining that mirror back on your characters to be like, are you so good? Because the answer is probably no. Probably no. That's the world of darkness. Question, and again, we got a little under a half hour left, and I give me all you want. If you give more than I have time for, I will rapid fire answer them. I don't mind. Just put a capital question in front of it. Which piece of Wraith was the most challenging for you as a storyteller? I think Changeling has the most dense lore. Wraith is second to that. The easiest part of the world of darkness, as I said previously, is it is this world. Like when somebody's like, well, what does this look like? Looks like that right there. That's what it looks like, you know? Wraith doesn't have that. In Wraith, if you're not setting your story in the Skinlands, you're in the Shadowlands, which is already different. And then it gets increasingly more and more different. If you go out across the sea and describing what all that's like, going to Stygia, describing all of that, Wraith is the furthest removed from our native reality, which requires you to impart more lore and information on the players than the other games do. Even with Changeling, it's most of the game is not set in the dreaming usually, and if you enter the dreaming's kind of easy to explain and describe because you're like, it's the place you go when you dream. Which, when I just say those words to you, everybody immediately you're kind of like, okay. And then you can start describing the details from there. Wraith doesn't really have that. There's not a lot of handholds to be able to use as a point of reference in Wraith, usually. I think that was the most challenging part. Now, let me talk a little bit about when I said I wanted to talk about what makes a good player, because this is all part of this same thing here. um, that I want to make sure that I lay on you here in the time that we've got. Um, like I said, remember it's a collaborative art. You should be looking for moments where you get to do dope things because of course you want to be there to have your moments also. Um, but I literally look at it in terms of like trying to lead the league in assists. How many times can I set other people up to have a cool moment? And that doesn't have to be in combat. To if you have an idea that somebody has premonition and can see the future, don't be meta and be like, "Hey, do premonition." You could be like, "Well, you get those visions, right? Can you see anything?" And just give them a chance, like, hey, aren't you good at that thing? Maybe you should take a look at this, like that kind of stuff. It is very easy to do. A thing that has proven to be very helpful to me, and I try and do in my games now to the best of my ability, especially when you're streaming. When you're playing weekly games, there is less pressure because you don't necessarily have a season arc to plan for. But definitely when you're streaming, and you even can do it in home games, is talk before the session, or at least talk during the break about roughly which way the story is going. So you don't spend a lot of time spinning your wheels, where it's like, hey, do go towards the mountains, don't go towards the ocean. Hey, we're probably going to be at the club all night tonight. Or if you're going to leave the club, don't leave until after you have the meeting with the Primogen. Something like that. It doesn't have to be a spoiler, but at least then everybody's rowing in the same direction, and you'll remove frustration from people, because if you're trying to delay them for something, they might feel frustrated, or if you're dropping hints and they don't pick up on them, they might feel lost. So that's something to keep in mind there. Again, like I said, remember that you are a team. I cannot stress that enough. um, and realize that not everyone is here to get the same thing, and try and be mindful of that. You got your trench coat katana players that are going to want to do nothing but fight. You also have very a combat characters that not only don't fight, are probably not going to contribute meaningfully to any fights. I don't know if Megan is here with us with Paisley. Even though Paisley got her gun eventually with the rainbow danger tube, I knew if violence started, Paisley was probably going to hide under a table through the whole fight, because that was that character and that was what she was going to do, which is fine. I also knew there was other characters that if I had an NPC show up to talk, the first thing they were going to do was try and like hit them with their collie sticks, or if they didn't attack them immediately, they were just going to try and mean mug and flex and intimidate people the whole time. And in Vampire, that doesn't always work. But if I knew those were the people that were going to be playing that day, I had to adjust the situations accordingly. So the talky people got time to be talky, the violent people got time to be violent, and everyone got an opportunity to play to their strengths there. um I know we keep talking about the darkness of the world of darkness, which is of course intrinsic, but it also can be sexy and fun. You know, the interview with a vampire tropes of we are all gorgeous, rich, and powerful sex gods are very valid and very valid stories to play. You very much can play this game like a soap opera. Dare I say it should be more of a soap opera than an action movie. I mean, this is the thing that Jason and I different on in our opinions. Is to him, he's like, the disciplines and the powers are the most boring point of the game. They're those are the least interesting point of the game. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, it's good that we can like talk and stuff, but every once in a while, soaring leap, yo. You know, I mean, it's we're in it to feel powerful. And there should be times that your character's supernatural capabilities that you as a mortal do not necessarily possess, and I of course don't possess because vampires aren't real. No, don't worry about it, forget I said anything. um need to come to the forefront also. You should be mixing all of those things in, because the person at the table chose this character, chose this clan, and chose these disciplines because they wanted to use them. So make sure you give them a chance that they can. Um, I mean, let me just tell you one other thing here, just in general, is the difference between a stream and a home game, for the record, because they're in some ways, when I play in a home game, I play the same. I'm still trying to do the best that I can to make it a fulfilling opportunity for everybody, experience for everyone. But a part of the home game is the social side of it. Talking about work, talking about your significant others, talking about the latest episode of The Mandalorian, talking about the Super Bowl, having a little bit of time to kvetch at the beginning. I would plan this into my Patreon games, because that's part of the team building, where you're all warming up and kind of getting comfortable with each other before you like dive deep into some insanity. The stream, you don't have that. The stream, you cut all of the fat out of it until there is nothing left, but the action that you're going to take. And by action, I don't necessarily mean combat. I just mean you get into the story and what the story's about. So when you're in your home game, don't rush that stuff. But when you're in a stream, skip all of it. Like I said, be ready on your turn, and learn the rules of the game. I understand that at the beginning, you don't know everything, and it's a lot of vocabulary, and you have to figure out these dice and clans and characters and all this other stuff, and it can be overwhelming. But if you're going to take the time to play it, try and become a student of the game, at least know what your character can do, so that you can have um, more tactical options available at your disposal. And also, again, just not bog down play. Again, when you're a beginner, can't help it. If it's a one shot, it's a new character, can't help it. But if you've been playing this character for 6 months, by now you should know what your dice pool for, since the unseen is, and be ready when it gets to you. To try not to be the bottleneck to the best of your ability. It is unavoidable at times, of course, but at least try. You know. Um, Also, it being a DM is a lot of effort and a lot of work and a lot of planning and a lot of mental energy to exert. So if you got somebody that is consistently running games for you, make sure you say thank you to them, especially if you really enjoyed a session. You don't necessarily have to do it publicly, but shoot them a message, be like, hey, that Elysium scene was really great. I appreciate that, or well, you man, you had my heart racing during that car chase scene. I thought we were dead. Give them that positive feedback, because I think it's human nature that a lot of times we it's easy to complain when you're unhappy, but it is more difficult to speak up when you're happy and satisfied with something. And that sort of validation is why the DM shows up to do what they do. Remember, I said at the beginning that it is a sacred trust, but it is a sacred trust that cuts both ways. Because yes, the players could be anywhere doing anything, but the DM could be anywhere doing anything also. So make sure you're expressing um, that esteem back for them. And remember also that these stories give you an opportunity to form bonds that will last forever. Like we shot We're Alive Frontier 3 years ago this week, and we still have a group text that we talk in all the time. We still talk to each other, because it's like we went to war together, and that formed a real bond. I have a group that I ran Pathfinder for. We played from level 1 to level 20 with all 10 mythic tiers. It took about 4 years. We still talk every day. We still have stories from those games, about things that we did and things that we experienced. And that is an experience that everyone should have. And it only comes with um, having time as a part of an ongoing group to the best of your ability. It's difficult to schedule things. I get it. But now, in the time of the pandemic, everybody's home. So if you haven't taken the time to try and get something consistent going, I highly recommend that you do. And if you don't know how to find a game to play in and participate in, then speak up, say the word, say it on social media. Hey, I'm looking for a vampire game, cool. Hey, we got a bunch of questions that just poured in at the end. And again, we got a little under 15 minutes. Drop them all on me. Just say capital question in front. I will speed round these. Remember, Ask Your Black Geek Friend. We used to do like like 20, 25 questions in like 5 minutes. So, all right. How much do you integrate community pressure to influence your players' character choices when they aren't on pace? Um, I think by community pressure, um, well, it depends. At the end of the day, the story is going to go where it goes. Again, you don't necessarily want to get stuck being railroady, but you also can't let everything fall apart due to one person's indecision. Um, if they are out of sync with everyone else, and when you come to them and you're like, so what do you do? And you listen, and then you move on to the next person to do what they do, to try and equally split up um the work there. I think the most egregious example I had of this was not in Vampire. It was actually when I was a raid leader in World of Warcraft, where if you played the game, you know that at any given time there are certain builds for your character that are just optimal. That the maximum damage is done, the maximum tanking is done, the maximum healing is done. Like, there are a lot of right ways to do it. Um, but there's usually a best way to do it, and there are a lot of wrong ways. And we had this one dude that just like, I have to play it this way because this is what I think is fun, but we couldn't beat the boss because he didn't have the damage output, you know? And he was just so adamant that he was like, no, but this is how I want to do it. I'm like, yeah, but you're ruining it for 9 people. So you either got to do what's best for the whole, or we got to replace you. I'm fine with you doing it how you want to do it, but you're not going to do it with us because you're ruining all of our nights, and that is the conversation I've had to have. Again, in Vampire, it's usually not like that, or in the World of Darkness, it's usually not like that. The closest I've had is I have had conversations with people about streaming that I'm like, this is not the dick joke stream. This is not the that's what she said stream. That is not this one. That stream exists. I've been on a lot of those. I've run a lot of those, but I'm like, but if I'm in a trying to describe something dark and intense and creepy, and you're cracking jokes, even if it's deflective humor, you're messing it up for everybody. Stop. That is something I've done more than once and will do again in the future, honestly. So much so that there's a stream coming up that is unannounced yet. But one of the characters was like, I don't think I can stay serious for 3 hours. We work together to create a character for them that is kind of going to be a bit of a sweet bean in the midst of all the other terrible stuff. So they almost have kind of an in-world exhaust valve where they can say something that the human needs to say that still won't completely disrupt the narrative. So that's how I handle it. What's your favorite werewolf tribe? I'm equally split between the Shadow Lords and the Silver Fangs, but the Shadow Lords edge them out. Because to me, the Shadow Lords are the Anarch Ventru, and the Silver Fangs are the Camarilla Ventru. So Shadow Lord. How do you handle cross-genre World of Darkness games, or do I avoid that? I hear a collective laugh from all of my patrons. Yeah, no, I do it. The difficult, ultimately, we had to play most of the World of Darkness games. We didn't allow any vampires because without the vampires, they can go out in the daytime, which is important. And there's enough characters, especially werewolves, that really would kill them on sight. And it took too many mental gymnastics to justify why the vampires are here. Um, Other than that, we did what I used as a blueprint, honestly, was stories like the Justice League, where you've got Superman and Hawkgirl in the same story, and yet they still have to find a way to do something that is valid for both of them, even though her powers are so inferior to his, as it were. Um, it still just comes down to giving each character a chance and an opportunity to do the thing that they get to do and feel cool about. All things being equal, though, keeping them away from the vampires is probably a better idea because most of the other World of Darkness characters are way stronger than vampires, especially in V5, all things being equal, but it can be done. And we did it a lot. Would you say that it's a possibility the fifth edition format that cross splat play may become easier, at least less cumbersome, due to the difference in mechanics the fifth mentioned streamlining? Yeah, see what I just said above. We house ruled a bunch of stuff, but it's always going to be tough. I mean, even if the werewolves are depowered, your average werewolf is still going to work your average vampire. So, you still got to be mindful of that. What system do you use to run a game online? Roll 20, Theater of the Mind, Theater of the Mind, Theater of the Mind. I've yet to find a good tabletop tool for World of Darkness. And these stories, more than anything, I find it unnecessary. I find trying to move around tokens on a digital map is contrary to trying to generate a sense of existential dread. But of course, your mileage may vary. Do I prefer World of Darkness or fantasy setting? Uh, I love them both. I love them both for different reasons. That's like asking, it's like, hey, do you like, do you like pizza or do you like coffee? I'm like, yes, maybe not at the same time. Although Ravenloft, so, you know what? Actually, here's more accurate. You're like, do you like pizza or do you like beer? And I'm like, both. And on occasion, I like pizza and beer. And that's Ravenloft. Not including games where you do world building, how much prep do you do before a session zero? I plan out, it depends. A home game, I have an idea what's going to happen. The way I was able to run 30 to 35 games a month, by the way, is the game was not about any individual. The game was about Los Angeles and everything that was happening in LA. I knew the schedule in advance. I knew who would be there. So I was able to tailor those events in such a way that relevant aspects of what was happening were showing up for the players with relevant problems they could solve. But I knew what machinations were at play, and so it was very easy to just plug the people into that at the time and let it go where it went. And then I would just throw as many sticks of dynamite as I could into the mix to create as many complications as I could that would ripple outwards in through the Discord and into the next set of games. For streamed series, I plan very heavily the opening, especially if I'll usually write out what I'm going to say for the opening, usually. And I plan very heavily up to about the first half. I use the exact same structure that I use to plot out an episode of television or a film, depending how long it's going to go. And but only the first half, because by the second half it's already in motion. And again, you can't overplan because the characters, the players, and the dice will betray you, and you don't want them to feel railroaded. So you have to incite the incident how you want it, but then be prepared to go where it goes. And I'm very comfortable just ad-libbing it all by this point because I've done it so many times. Have you ever done Vampire LARP? Yep, the very first vampire game I ever played was a LARP, and I played a Ventru. I have not LARP tons though, but we had a LARP that we did right before LA by Night started. We literally played the weekend before when I played the Ventru Primogen and tested out a lot of the concepts I had for Victor on that. Bruce Monarch ran those games. I think I was in 2 of the 4. I think it was dope stuff. Um, Last question again, unless somebody else wants to drop, because we got about 5 minutes. So, this is the last call for questions. Just drop them all with capital question in front of it. To clarify my previous question, before you play in urban environments, do you have neighborhood NPCs interact influentially with the characters? Yeah, because that's what brings the setting to life. A lot of times you never know who is going to be the influential NPC. Also, you can just throw them out there and people are going to fall in love with some of them. When in Long Beach by Night, my goal in season 1 of Long Beach by Night was, it was sort of a survey of the world of darkness. Because we'd done LA, I wanted to show people what mages and werewolves and changelings and wraiths were like. So that's what season 1 of Long Beach was all about. When they met the changelings, I think there was like 5 or 6 of them there, but 2 of them stuck, which were his Fawn, the unseelie satyr, and the Slua, which is a Slua. It's basically a boogeyman. And Fawn became one of just the most pivotal and foundational characters in the Patreon stream. And the Slua showed up again in Wraith and in Changeling that I just did, up to and including a very tearful reveal of his background and story and what his whole deal was and why he was the way he was. It just so happened those characters are what resonated with the players, and that's what I went with. I think as many opportunities as you can find to have an interesting NPC interact with the characters and advance the story in a meaningful way versus you just monologuing is going to increase the player's sense of immersion into the narrative and feel like it is a world that they are in and a part of rather than you just talking at them. So with that being said, let me give you my final spill here before we wind this up, because we got about 4 minutes left and I don't want to eat up in anyone else's time because I am a professional. If you are thinking about playing these games, if you're thinking about running Vampire or any other World of Darkness game, if you're thinking about trying to find a group, do it. Just do it. Don't wait. Get your friends together. Get the book, which I literally always have within arm's reach of me. Get some dice and just mess around and figure it out. Don't stress about knowing every single thing about it. You don't have to. Just get in there, have some fun, tell some stories with your friends. Because if there's anything that this pandemic has taught us, is the thing that is most important is our ability to stay connected with each other. And if there has been anything that has been positive out of the apocalypse that we have been had thrust upon us here, that 2020 was both 4 months long and 8.5 years, is it allowed us to connect with people and play games together that we otherwise never would have, right? I've had groups go on that in that we put together for streams that never would have happened in the before times. So utilize that, lean into that, and whatever you're thinking, if you're thinking about drawing pictures, telling stories, running streams, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. I'm B. Dave Walters. That's me on Twitter and Instagram and Erwar. You can ask me any questions you want. My DMs are open also. If you're not comfortable asking publicly, don't come talking any silliness or I will rinse you because I am what I am. But these stories, this world, this setting, the world of darkness is objectively terrible as it has been at times, has brought me so much limitless joy. And there is no better way to get in and explore, quite frankly, who you really are, what the world is really like, what you're truly afraid of, and what you would do with power than to play these games. So if you haven't, absolutely get Vampire, get any of the 20th edition of any of the other games, get your friends together and have some fun. And with that, I am out. Thank you all. We'll see you soon. Bye.